The domain and range of a function. Ultimately, all functions do is convert inputs into outputs. So each function has two sets associated with it. Those things that serve as inputs and those that serve as outputs. So the domain and range of a function. The domain of a function is all of the inputs. Okay, we've known that. I think I've mentioned that in passing, or the x's. Okay, and then the range of a function are the outputs, and we've been calling them the y's. So again, we've got some synonyms here. Domain, inputs, x's, range, outputs, y's. Consider this function y equals f of x here to the right. It says evaluate each of the following. F of negative 3. So if my x is negative 3, my y value is 1. F of 1, my y value is negative 3. And if my x is 3, my y value comes out to be 5. It says, can this function rule given by this graph give you a value when x is 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out here, does it touch the graph at all? Okay, it does not. So if not, why not? And we would say no. Okay, because we can't get a y value for an x of 5. Okay, so 5 is not in the domain. Put that in parentheses. 5 is not in the domain. It's not one of the x's associated with this function. Okay, is x in the domain of the function? Whoops, I just answered that question. I probably could even move that right there. Okay, so now let's take a look at, give two other values of x that are not in the domain. So two other values of x not in the domain. So there's lots of them, okay? I might pick something over here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Let's turn my pen back on, okay? If I'm out here at an x of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 6, and go up and down this y, I don't touch the graph. So a domain, okay, or an x value of negative 6 doesn't produce any output for that particular function. So negative 6 is not in the domain of this function. And then I could come out to here. I could come out to here. And if I go up and down this y, okay, so we've got an x of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's what we answered in that last question, or out here to 6. We could even say somewhere here along the 4, okay? So I'm going to say those two. They are not in the domain, okay? So circle the following y values that are in the range of this function. Show evidence on your graph. So we've got to look at these 6 values and see if they're in the range. So a y of 0, a y value, okay, of 0. So where y is 0 is all along the x-axis, okay. So, yep, that's in the range, a y value of 0. Moving next to it, what about a y value of 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nope, that's not in the range. What about a y value of negative 1? Down here, y value of negative 1, yep, that would be there. We could have one here. Okay, we definitely had some other y values of 0 here and here. Okay, I'll circle those as well. So far, the two that are in our range are 0 and negative 1. What about a y value of 3? So I go up 1, 2, 3. Do we have something that has a y value of 3? Sure do, right there. That one's in our range. What about a y value of negative 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is there anything along here? And there's not. And then the last one, what about a y value of 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. Sure is right there. Okay. So out of this list, 4 of them happen to be in the range of this particular function. So now it says, write the domain and the range of this function using a single inequality. Okay, so they want inequality notation for this domain and range. So if the domain are my x values, okay, I'm going to erase what's on here just so we can focus in on the graph a little bit more. Okay. The domain, my x values. So how far left and how far right does this graph go? So 1, 2, 3, 4, -5 is that value, and 1, 2, 3 is that x value. So my domain would go from -5, which is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 3. And those values are equal to, okay, it does touch those lines. Okay, we do have those points there. Remember, we're not talking about increasing and decreasing. So they are equal to there. Then we could put that in interval notation and we would use brackets. So that's our domain. So now let's talk about our range. How high and how low does this graph go? Okay, so I'll change colors. So it looks like the top of my particular curve here maxes out there. And then, I gotta erase this so I can see. The bottom of my graph, okay, or my lowest point goes to there. So my lowest point, 1, 2, 3, is -4. And my highest point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're talking the range, the up and the down. So my range is going to be -4 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to 5. And then in interval notation, -4, 5, bracket. Go ahead and flip the page. So it says, given this function and the domain shown below, fill in the range. Write the set in roster notation. Okay, so this is something a little bit different, but not hard at all. Okay, so if we've got a domain of -4, and we put this into our function, we'd say -4 divided by 2 minus 3. So that's -2 minus 3. That produces an output of -5. So we can kind of draw a line to that. Okay, that little arrow. Well, what does 6 do for us? So 6 divided by 2 minus 3. 3 minus 3, that would produce a 0. Okay, a 6 produces a 0. So then what does a 10 do? 10 divided by 2 minus 3. 5 minus 3, that's going to give us 2. So a 10 outputs a 2. So they want the range in roster notation. Just different notation, guys. They're curly brackets. And you just list them out. -5, 0, 2, close your curly brackets. Okay? Which of the following values is not, okay, in the domain of this function? Illustrate your thinking by marking points on the graph. Okay? So is -3 in this domain? 1, 2, -3, and that sure is. Okay? What about -4? That certainly is. What about 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do I meet the graph anywhere? So that looks like that's the one that's not, but now let's show that 0 is. Okay, 0, and it certainly does touch the graph there. Consider the piecewise function given by this formula. Okay, we've got 2 pieces to it. Determine the function's range. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go into our calculator. I'm going to pause mine to turn my calculator on. Okay, I'm going to pause it again, but I'm just going to remind you guys where to enter into the piecewise function. So we go to the home screen, to 1, and then add a graph, and then for the piecewise function next to the 9 key, and there are 2 parts to it. So that's the one we want. Go ahead, enter yours in, and then resume it. Okay, so I've entered my piecewise function in. Okay, I've got both my parts, I've got both my domains listed, and now I'm going to hit enter, so it's going to graph it for us. And I can move that label out of the way. All right, so now the question is asking us, okay, determine the function's range. So if I want to determine the function's range, I've probably got to look at the graph and or look at the table of this to determine how high and how low it's going to go. I kind of have an idea here, but not exact. Here's how high it goes, and then here's my low point here. Okay, so if I go to Control T, T for table, and start to sort of scroll through this, I'm seeing some weird things here. Okay, that's undefined. Okay, meaning okay, those values are not defined in this function. Okay, so those values are not part of the domain. So now when I start here at -4, I start to see some output values. So -4 is part of my domain, and you can see that when you entered it in. Okay, and then we start to scroll through, and then we come up to 5, and we see that it's undefined there. So the only values that are present in this function, okay, are the ones that we're seeing. So let's go ahead and copy down from -4 to 4 on your paper and start it up again. Okay, so I copied all of my x values down from -4 to 4 and all of my y values down, okay, that corresponded to those. Now, if you can see right here, okay, my domain went from -4 equal to all the way up to +4. Okay, so you could see that ahead of time, even before we went to look at the table. So they said determine the function's range. Okay, so what's the highest point on my range list here? It looks like that 6 is my highest point, and what's my lowest point on here? That -2. So therefore, my range is going to go from -2, which is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to 6. So again, my highest point in my range list is 6, and my lowest point, okay, so here's my high, and here's my low. So -2 to 6, interval notation, -2 to 6. Okay, we can talk about domain. Now our domains are already written up here, but if we wanted to put those into interval notation, we'd say -4 to 4. Sorry, my phone is ringing. You can go ahead and graph that, and then we'll practice tomorrow in class. Thanks, guys.